I have no idea how this video is going to turn out because I low-key feel like I'm losing my voice, so that's great. I'm on AskReddit reading people's creepiest and most unnerving stories. My family used to rent a house in town along with my aunt and uncle when I was very young, that we eventually moved out of because of very strange things that happened while we lived there. But the most memorable and final straw was the night my aunt was using the toilet and just happened to look down at this small hole in the floor that had been there since we moved in, and saw a man in the basement looking right back up at her smiling. My aunt ran out of the bathroom and screamed for my uncle. After explaining to him that there was a man in the basement, my uncle went and got my dad and they both went downstairs, the only entrance into the basement, where they found nothing but footprints in the dirty floor where someone had been standing and moving around under the hole. My 4-year-old daughter was supposedly asleep when I heard a noise coming from her upstairs bedroom. I tried to listen but could not make out what was being said. I approached the room and she stopped talking. Thinking I alarmed her, I went into the room. At the time, she was sharing it with her 3-year-old sister. I walked in and saw the 4-year-old sitting up in bed. I smiled and said, "Is everything okay?" She said fine, but her sister said they were keeping her up. I asked who. My 4-year-old said sorry, but that she was talking. When I asked her who she was talking to, my 3-year-old sat up and said, "The girl in the window, she said you were coming." After I shit a brick, I asked who the girl was, and they both said a girl comes and stands in front of the window at night and talks to them. Not knowing what to say, I said okay, tucked them in and hung around outside the door. The next day I asked about the girl. They said she came back but she was mad. I waited a few days and asked again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still mad. I forgot about it for about a week, when my wife said, "Who were the girls talking to upstairs?" Freaked out, I ran upstairs and both girls were sitting under the window looking up. They turned and looked at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl. When they turned around, disappointed, they said the girl left. It has been about 5 years since, and I have not heard about the girl in the window since then. I was super excited to get my first apartment. It was an old antebellum house that was split into 4 units. A very cool place to live. However, every time I was taking a shower, I would get this overwhelmingly creepy feeling, like somebody was watching me. Then the dream started. I kept dreaming about this old lady in a pink nightgown. Sometimes she just looked frail and sweet, and she'd say that I should go with her. She never said where we'd go. Other times the dreams were terrifying. Her eye sockets were empty, her hair was greasy, stringy, and falling out. Her mouth was twisted in a tormented scream, and she'd frantically claw the air trying to grab me. The longer I lived there, the more menacing the dreams got. Also, the feeling of unease and the feeling of being watched in the shower increased dramatically. By the time we moved out, I couldn't close my eyes in the shower. It sounds silly, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I was going to die or lose my soul or something if I had my eyes closed too long. After moving out, I discussed all these weird feelings with a friend of mine who had recently moved into a house across the street from the old apartment. I was trying to laugh it off. He said that another friend of his used to live in the apartment above mine several years ago. An old lady died in what used to be my apartment. Nobody else wanted to live in that unit for more than a couple months at a time. The building recently burned down. The fire started in my old apartment. They still don't know what started the fire. Still creeps me out. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realising how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on a single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by many portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to the wall. And exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. Face down in an unfamiliar bed, he turned blinking in an unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. This is a true story, told to me by a man who had been working as a murder investigator for over 30 years at the time. I was told the story after asking what the creepiest case he'd ever been involved in was. This happened in northern Scandinavia in the late 80s, in a part of the country that is mostly covered in dense pine forest. On the highway between cities in this part of the country, you do come across the occasional villages and secluded houses, but there are stretches that seem to go on forever, with only pine trees as far as you can see. A young girl in her early 20s was taking a motor coach home after being on a trip down south, presumably visiting friends or relatives. This happened just as winter was approaching, and it was freezing outside after nightfall. This girl lived in one of these really small communities that you pass along the highway. During the bus trip, she fell asleep and missed her stop. Looking at her watch, she realised that they'd passed it only recently, and that if she were to get off, she would be able to walk back in approximately 3 hours. Either that or get off in the next city where she didn't know anyone or had any place to stay. She explained all of this to the bus driver, who pulled off at the next parking space and let her off. That was the last time anyone saw her. Almost 15 years later, long after the search for her has been given up, she is stumbled upon by a hiker. Her dead body was found tied to a tree, well over an hour's walk away from the road into the dense, almost impassable forest. The autopsy showed no signs of physical violence of any kind. Someone had just left her there alive. Every time a family would leave their house and come home, they would find that there was a plate or a drinking glass or some other object sitting out. The family could have sworn that they cleaned up their stuff, but figured they must have been forgetting to clean up some stuff before they would leave. They noticed this happening every once in a while for a couple of months, until one day they pulled into their driveway and saw smoke coming from their garage. As they opened the garage door, they saw a man inside setting their house on fire. They quickly closed the door back and ran for help from their neighbour while calling the police. The police finally came and they caught the guy and discovered that the man had been living in their house for months in their attic and sneaking down to eat when the family would leave. He had all their information and was planning on killing them and running off with all their information. I literally feel like I'm about to lose my voice at any given moment, so I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, then please like, comment and subscribe. Or don't, I have no control in what you do. Links to my other social medias are in the description, so if you want to check those out, you can. But yeah, I really need to stop speaking now before my voice actually gives out, so I'll see you whenever I next see you.